I wanted to share with you my own personal experience that I've had having my boys and how I had to deal with that going back to work. I know some of you may not have had kids yet, some of you may have had different experiences. But before I say all this, I want to brag on the fact that Union University is a good place to work at, and they are very family friendly. They do everything they can to help you out, but it's still not perfect. My husband and I have done everything right. We were married almost 10 years before we had kids. We had a house. We pay our bills. We've never missed payments. We have good jobs. I have a PhD. I'm a very qualified and educated woman. But even then, even following all the Dave Ramsey rules, we could not afford for me to take maternity leave. Just, it couldn't be done. I can't afford to take the 12 weeks of unpaid. And at Union, we do not get paid maternity benefits. We get to use up our sick days. And in order for me to max out my sick days, which is basically 5 weeks, I would have to work 5 full years and never take a sick day to be able to earn enough sick days, my max, which is 60 days, and to be able to use that towards my maternity leave. And that just wasn't going to happen. And we couldn't afford it. So for me, it came down to we had to plan the pregnancy really carefully. And I know people think, well, you can't plan it. Well, we kind of did. You had no choice, certain window of time. And so I planned both of my boys to hit right around spring break. My second one actually planned, it was a little bit better. It was a little bit later, with our intent of I would have the baby around spring break, come back to work for just a little bit, and then I would have all of summer off to be able to stay home with the kids. And so with my first one, he was a little bit earlier. He was in March. And so I came back to work, I think it was 8 weeks after he was born. Came back and final exams and stuff for the students, and then I had my summer off. With my second son, with Elliot, it was 26 days between when he was born and when I was back in the classroom standing up in front of a class teaching. Now, that is not anyone's fault, except for that's just the way the system works. It's not Union's fault. I'm not trying to say it's Union's fault by any means, but that was just the reality we were working with. There were days, not anymore because they're older now, but there were days when, especially night classes were tough. Daycares close at 5 and night class starts at 6. And my husband is a coach, so they would have games or out of town or whatever. And there were nights that he would bring the baby, tiny little baby, to class. And I would teach my MBA class with the baby asleep on my shoulder. And that was just what we had to do. Daycares close at 5. We have absolutely no family in the area. My husband's Canadian. I'm not from this area. There was no one here. At that age of the baby, I did not feel comfortable leaving them with a babysitter, right? Because they're tiny, tiny, tiny little babies. And we just did what we had to do to get by. Now, we were lucky because our job accommodated that. We were able to make it work, but not everybody has that benefit. I spoke with an HR director recently and asked them kind of what their perspective on the FMLA Act and all that stuff was. And with family medical leave, you get 12 weeks unpaid. The state of Tennessee allows an additional 4 weeks. That's 16 weeks. 4 months sounds great, but it's not paid. Most people, I don't know anybody that can afford 4 months off. And in addition to that, I said, well, and that starts too, if the mom gets put on bed rest, that counts. It's not just like when the baby hits, then the 12 week starts. It's the whole period up to it. So if it's a tough pregnancy, all that counts. And I said, well, what happens if, let's say, someone gets put on bed rest for a month or two towards the end of the pregnancy, and then they have the baby, and they need just a little bit extra time, or they need more time because, health conditions or whatever. And the HR director said pretty much then it's time to have a conversation with the employee that maybe they're not going to be able to come back to work. Maybe they're going to have to let their job go. It was stressful enough for me having a job, knowing I wasn't going to lose my job, and the guilt. And I have no better way of putting it other than just the flat out guilt you feel of leaving this little tiny baby behind, when God gave you these instincts to protect and to care for this child for a reason. And everything, especially when they're really little and you only had a few weeks with them, every instinct in your body is telling you, do not leave this child, but you got to go. You got to go to work, and that's just life, and that's how it is. I have had renters that I've talked to that rent from us that have gone back to work in 10 days after having the baby. And physically, I couldn't even imagine. One lady was a waitress, and she went to work 10 days after having the baby. And so, stuff is sore. You still hurt. You're aching. You're not sleeping. You're exhausted. And here she is waiting tables 8 hours a day, and mom's taking care of the baby. So I'm telling you all this Because if you have not had the experience of having a child, or you don't want to have kids, or maybe you have 30 kids, I don't know, it doesn't matter. The point of this is you need to make sure as a manager, when you're in charge and this is your turn to be influencing someone's life, that you think about how you would want to be treated. How would you feel if that was you? If you've already been through it, you know how it feels. Think about if it was your child, if that was your family member, your husband, how would you feel? Put yourself in their place, treat them the way they should be treated. And I know there's lots of arguments about, well, the cost of welfare and the cost of paying for mothers to be able to take time off. It's worth it. In the long run, it is worth it. It'll give us a healthier nation. The system's not perfect. We can find ways. We can find different things to do. But we need to find a better way to help our employees and to make this easier for them, make this transition. And I do want to stress, this is not a women's issue. This is a family issue. Fathers need to be able to take time off. Fathers shouldn't feel guilty. My husband felt horrible that he had to drop the baby off where I was working so that he could go work. He felt guilty about that, right? It's not just a mom thing. It's a dad thing. It's an everybody thing. Grandparents. My cousin, who was a single mother, was leaving her baby with our grandmother, so the baby's great-grandmother, who was 70 and really should not have been watching babies. There's no way I'd have left my kid with them. But she had no choice. That was all she could do. That was the only person available to watch the baby while she could go to work in the evenings. And so she would go to work feeling guilty and scared that what happens if grandma falls asleep and the baby's up? What happens if grandma gives the baby something wrong? This is all stuff that you're worrying about when you're at work, when you should be spending time with your babies. So again, I don't have an answer, but just keep this in mind. Remember this. Put yourself in your employee's place and do your very best to help them and accommodate them as much as you can.